Hi, I'm Madden, and I design data visualization, information, and user experience. I want to talk to you a little bit about what I think visual thinking is and how it can apply to you. About 90% of the people I've worked with, maybe even more, lack this skill of functional drawing. So with all of these 100 people, maybe 10 out of those are really comfortable or at least brave enough to try drawing their ideas and showing them and using them as a communication tool. The reason that most people are less comfortable drawing is a couple things. First of all, there's a myth out there that you are born an artist. So maybe 1 out of 6 people was lucky enough to be born with some sort of artistic gene, but that's really not true. Another thing is that drawing is considered to be disruptive when you're learning in school. So students who are doodling might get punished for doing such things, where teachers might not understand that they're still paying attention, they're just kinesthetically learning or visually learning in order to better focus and better participate and digest the information. Another big reason that people feel uncomfortable drawing is in the work environment. We've been given tools like PowerPoint, which are great to some degree, but they've really limited our visual vocabulary to the library of chevrons and pyramids and cycles that you can choose from. So rather than really think about, is this the best way to visualize an idea, many people go into the library in PowerPoint or the chart types in Excel, and they limit themselves to what's available to them within that tool set. And I think that's, something that people need to get more comfortable with, working first outside of PowerPoint and then finding the right visual once they've determined what it is on pen and paper. My journey started out when I was in my first job and I was a graphic designer, and I was in a lot of meetings where my role was to just listen and think about how I could translate the content into effective visuals. And most of the time I would just sit in the room and doodle, and most of the time it wasn't really relevant. It was what I call random doodling. I'm still listening, but people look at me like, hey, you're being disrespectful and you're not really paying attention here. So once I realized that's how it was being perceived, I tried to focus on relevant doodling. So how do I actually take what people are saying and capture it visually on my piece of paper? I'm not being disruptive, I still appear to be paying attention, and my notes provide a great reference point for later on when I need to go back and remember what people were talking about that day. And then finally, there was a point in time where I just began to stand up and use whatever was available to draw for everybody to see. I will tell you, and in the words of Dan Rome, whoever draws the best picture wins, has really proven to be true. I never have the best idea, I'm just the one who stands up and draws my own, and a lot of times that's what gets people moving in the direction that I suggest. So functional drawing is really not about being pretty or stylized. It's more about these 4 things. You want to increase the number of ideas that you have. You want to improve the speed to which you create prototypes and ideas, and also decrease the number of money you spend doing that by just roughly drawing it on paper. It also helps you increase your understanding of a concept by exploring it in different ways. So Dan Rome talks in his book, Blah, 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 about all the ways you could visualize an apple, starting with simple, going to an alternative idea, going to a more complex idea. So if you try to view a certain topic from different angles, this will really help you increase your understanding. And then the last thing is increase your ability to communicate. So when you're using words, a lot of times your idea might not come across. If you use visuals combined with words, things tend to really click for people, and you start to get other people contributing to the idea and creating better and more conversation. So visual thinking in general is a way that you can increase your understanding of a topic, you can organize the thoughts that you have, and you can communicate a message clearly. So why would we draw data? First of all, it helps communicate and message your idea, and it's fast. You can prototype really quickly. You don't have to spend time collecting data, preparing it in Excel. You don't have to choose the right visual. There's none of that. You save time and you save money. But even better than that, nobody's checking your math. They're just looking at your visual to understand the high-level concept. The way that we want to talk about drawing data is to stop thinking about it in terms of the rows and columns that you're used to working with if you do a lot of data visualization. If you don't worry about it. But we've got these tools that we are used to using digitally, like Excel. We're not going to go there. We're also not going to try and think only through the charts that are available in PowerPoint or Excel. What we're going to start with is mapping out all of the different concepts that we could visualize, choosing a couple that tell a good story, and then creating simple hand-drawn visuals that look something like this, that just show there's a relationship between variable X, variable Y, and all of the different choices or options that you have. This is how I envision visual thinking. So on one side, you've got visual analysis, just to help you better understand a concept. On the other side, we've got visual communication, where you want to communicate that concept to an audience. And in between, we've got visual storytelling, where you're engaging an audience with your analysis process and your message that you want to communicate, which will ultimately influence them a little bit more than just communicating that visually. There's an implicit direction that we are ultimately doing visual thinking to communicate our ideas. And so an important consideration is your audience. The way that you can decide which one is working best is by putting it in the framework of that audience and putting yourself in their shoes and understanding what do they want to know and how do they like to communicate and digest information. And that will help you decide kind of how and which visuals that will work best for that.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all of our latest videos.